Hi, I'm Karen Norris, and this video will be focusing on the key ideas of the lessons I taught over the course of 2 days in this classroom. This video is specifically for the students of that class. There were two main objectives over the course of those 2 lessons. The first objective was to have you guys, the students, to hypothesize and design a method for explaining how cells grow and divide. And you were also supposed to explain your reasoning for your specific design. What I had y'all do was come up with your own model of the cell cycle. We started with the beginning and we knew how the cell cycle ended. So y'all were coming up with the 2 in-between stages. What we saw through the different groups were many different ideas, and in scientific thinking, not everyone thinks the same. There's always different ideas coming out and disagreements happening, and that's okay. And that's actually a good thing because it teaches you to argue for your idea or to adapt your ideas, to refine them, come back to them, and change them in the light of new information. Unfortunately, we didn't get into too much argument, but the second day we did have an explanation game where we learned specifically what actually happens in the cell cycle, and in the light of that information, we came back to our models and refined them so that we had a clear understanding and a clear picture of what happens in the cell cycle. And what we found out is that there are 4 phases, and the first one is G1, the second one was S phase or synthesis phase, the third one was G2 phase, and the fourth was mitosis phase. Once we did that, we moved on to the second part of the lesson, where we focused on the second objective, which is where I had you guys, the students, I had y'all explain the relationship between the cell cycle, mutation, and cancer. I would have liked to have spent a little bit more time on cancer and mutations, but unfortunately we ran out of time in the classroom. So had we been given more time, I would have been able to explain to you that there are many different kinds of mutations, but generally mutations refer to the alteration of genetic information. And genetic information is just fancy for DNA. Okay. What we learned from biology is that DNA is very important stuff in the cell. DNA is what we can consider as the genetic blueprint, or it kind of lays out what the cell will do, because from DNA you can end up with proteins, and proteins are what control the whole cell. And what we learned in our cell cycle explanation is that there are 2 really key protein molecules that help regulate the cell cycle, and they were CDK and cyclin. And what we found out in the end of that explanation is that if a mutation occurs and either they are affected by that mutation or they don't recognize that mutation, then the cell can repeatedly grow and divide unregulated. And that can lead to a pile of damaged cells because they just keep rapidly growing and dividing. And that is the makeup of a tumor. But a misconception or an idea that's commonly mistaken is that all tumors are cancerous. So not all, for example, skin tumors are cancerous. Maybe you're wondering why this is all important for me to know. Well, understanding mutations is important because mutations that lead to cancer, that's good information to know. Because you can figure out how I can prevent myself from these mutations, especially if they're environmentally related. If it's genetics, you can't really help yourself that much. So mutations like cancer are important to know because it's actually, for the longest time, for centuries really, it's been a mystery to many people. Cancer is a disease we've been studying for many years. And over the past few decades, we've really seen major insight into the causes of cancer, the processes that lead to cancer, and different ways to prevent yourself from these types of certain types of cancers. So through this extensive research in the past few decades on cancer, we've come to know even more about the cell cycle and the important regulatory proteins like CDK and cyclin. We now understand that there are hundreds of different types of cancers, but there is still so much to be learned about cancer. So if you're interested in science, cancer is a really cool route to take because there is a lot of research that's still needed on cancer. Those were the major points of our lesson. I just wanted to say thank you for the learning experience. I had a really fun time teaching y'all, and I wish you the best of luck with the rest of your studies.